You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network and the John Fredericks Radio app, and I am your Godzilla of the truth in America, your oracle of the deplorables, coming live in Washington, D.C. Joining me now, Mark Mix. Mark is the president and the CEO of the National Right to Work organization. Mark Mix, thanks for being with us. We got a lot to talk about today. Another boondoggle going on with unions trying to take away people's rights for all federal and government workers. President Trump signing an EO, Republicans abandoning it and going with the unions and taking away people's rights to decide whether or not they want to join a union if they're a government employee. Mark, can you break this down for us and how high the stakes are?
Yeah, John, thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. This is a relevant issue. Just this past week, there was action on this where President Trump, when he came into office, like every president since Jimmy Carter has done, has basically taken advantage of exemptions that are in federal law as it regulates federal employees and how the federal government and the executive branch, specifically the Article 2 executive branch, deals with employees at executive agencies. So Jimmy Carter started it in 1979. Barack Obama did it. Joe Biden did it. Ronald Reagan did it. George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush did it. They all talked about how the government is going to basically manage the agencies that have a national security profile. And obviously, Donald Trump, like he does, did things in a bigger way than lots of other presidents because he's bold and he wants to make America great again. And so he looked at it and said, you know what? It's kind of interesting that the president of the United States, the chief executive officer of the government, would be restrained by a private organization that's a special interest in politics, and that is government unions. In fact, the evidence is so clear, John, of what the president did and why he did it, is that we filed a brief in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia laying out a strategy that the unions had right before Trump got in office. In fact, at the Department of Education, they signed a 5-year agreement that would have taken the management of the Department of Education to the next president, past Donald Trump. At the EPA, the American Federation of Government Employees, signed a contract that literally said in a press release, we have now protected the employees so they can run the agency, and it doesn't matter who's in the White House. Well, Article 2 says something different about that, about the power of the chief executive to run the federal bureaucracy. And so when the president did this, the unions filed numerous lawsuits against him. They got district court judges to enjoin it from San Francisco and Rhode Island and all different places. But right now, it's a litigation issue that's in the D.C. Court of Appeals, probably end up in the Supreme Court. But to your point, John, Republicans in Congress sided with every Democrat last week to basically overturn the president's executive order and say, you know what? Article 2 doesn't matter. He has no authority over the federal bureaucracy. It's outrageous. It's now in the Senate, and it's going to be voted on there probably relatively quickly.
So who has authority over the federal bureaucracy?
Great question. The union bosses, they say it in their press releases that they should have it, and they should protect the employees from the chief executive officer of the United States of America.
I mean, it's incredible that we have these unions and an executive order by the commander in chief is overturned. And when it gets to the Senate, I don't know if I guess this is part of the filibuster, so it's going nowhere there. I can't imagine you get 10 Republicans voting for this, right?
Well, John, I have stopped thinking that my imagination will rule the day. I mean, we've got to win political battles, and we've got to make this a political battle. And the fact of the matter is, don't take anything for granted anymore. We know that, you know that. And what is it? Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We need to remember what the Democrats do when they're in power. They do these things. They think about it all the time. And when a union puts out a press release that says, hey, we're protecting this agency from whoever sits in the White House, whoever sits in the Oval Office, there's a problem with that structure.
Well, there's no question about it. Mark Mix with us. Mark is the president of National Right to Work. But you look at this, I mean, we had there were 20 some odd Republicans that sided with the Democrats in overturning this executive order, which is to give the authority over the bureaucracy to the executive branch. And really what President Trump was trying to do is diminish the power of the union bosses over the employees of the federal government, which, I mean, it makes no sense because these are taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, John. And you know, those 20 Republicans that voted to overturn the presidential authority here, they're on the left side of Franklin Roosevelt when it comes to this matter. They're on the left side of George Meany, the former president of the AFL-CIO, who said it's incompatible to think we can unionize government employees and negotiate over government policies. I mean, in the private sector where you have substitute goods and you have competition, the idea of that negotiation is a whole different animal when it comes to the public sector and government. Government, by definition, is a monopoly. And what we've done, going back to President Kennedy's executive order back in 1963, I think it was that we allowed a private special interest in between taxpayers and elected officials when it comes to how we run our government. And it has not made us better, John, that's for sure. In fact, a lot of states across the country who got into this bargaining with government unions are looking for ways out now because the fiscal crisis that unions have created by their just ongoing demands for more and more. Look at our educational system, John. I mean, the product there, the results of that product are diving, and we're losing children in the government education system. But yet we've got more employees, more money spent on that institution than we had, double the money, frankly, from 10 years ago. And it's just not working. And it's because this public union that's a special interest is in between, in this case, wants to be in between Article 2 executive branch employees and the CEO of Article 2, the executive branch.
So let me ask you this, Mark Mix. And by the way, great analysis of what is going on. So how do we defeat this in the U.S. Senate? You know that the 48 Democrats, I think we have, right? They're all going to vote. They're all going to vote for it, but they're going to have to get 60 votes, right? Because they can't put this in reconciliation. So, maybe the Republicans will break the filibuster, but if they don't, you're going to need 60 votes, which means you're going to need 12. Is it 60? Yeah. So you're going to need 12 Republicans to vote for this. How do we defeat it?
Well, I think we just expose it, John. That's the important thing. And thank you for taking the opportunity to do that. We've got to let Americans know what's going on. I think it was Thomas Jefferson, one of our famous Virginian presidents, who said an educated constituency is the only way we can preserve this grand experiment in self-government. So we've got to know what government's doing. And we've got to have an idea of what the special interest, in this case, the government union officials, are trying to do to basically wrangle control of the federal government. Now, we may come back 4 years from now when there's a new president, and we may be subjected to the same thing, that president's going to exercise his or her Article 2 authority, and we're going to have to take it because the Constitution says that branch, Article 2, that executive branch, should be controlled by the president. Obviously, the union's argument is, the president's a king or whatever he is, they call him. But the bottom line is this: the Constitution has a separation of powers, and that separation of powers is an important aspect of what we do. And so we got legislators that made the rule that allowed union officials to come in, and basically to temper that, they said, well, wait a minute, are we going to negotiate with Homeland Security when we're under attack? Are we going to negotiate at the Department of Defense with employees there about how we're going to respond to a national emergency? And frankly, every agency of the federal government, it probably be mobilized if there was a national security instance, whether it be the FDA or whoever it is going to have some role to play when America, or if America was ever attacked or there was a national security emergency. So the president went farther, but he went farther under authority and exemption that's granted to him as the chief executive officer of the United States.
You nailed it. And I think what you said earlier is about, this is not like a private concern where you have competition, you can go somewhere else. I mean, the government basically is the government employees. There's no competition. It's a monopoly. So it's almost like you're negotiating against yourself. But these are government employees, and to think that you're going to give them this level of power over policy, I mean, these are civil servants. The whole thing is insane beyond belief. And how do you go back to when we had this incident with the air traffic controllers in President Reagan's first term? I think it was in 81, and they were walking, under the union banner. They were walking off the job. And President Reagan fired them all, gave them a pink slip, and hired new ones and got them trained. And that was the end of that. Never happened again. Yeah. Explain the difference there.
Yeah, well, the significance that the union officials said that was the beginning of the union busting Republican Party, and that's the farthest thing possible from the truth, John. It's illegal to strike against the federal government. The statute is very clear. The union officials at the air traffic controllers knew that. All government employees know that this day. What Reagan did when they decided to walk out on the picket line, he said, look, you have 24 hours to come back to work. The law says this is illegal, and if you don't come back to work, you're going to be fired. That's not union busting. That's enforcing the law. And that's what the president did back then. And that's what the president should be able to do now to be able to control the federal bureaucracy. Obviously, the air traffic control situation is a one of those things that unions always point to say, oh, these Republicans, they don't like workers. No, what they do like, hopefully we like, is the rule of law. And the rule of law in this situation and that situation back then was that the president has the authority to run the executive branch of our government. And Article 2 says that very clearly, that he's in charge. The statute that allowed unionization, the Federal Labor Relations Act, passed in 1978, exactly says there's this exemption for the president. How the president uses it, up to him. And obviously, this legislative attempt is this discharge petition that the Democrats signed. They got enough Republicans to get over to pull the bill out, get it to the floor, and now we have 20 Republicans that sided with every Democrat to basically say, no. The unions get to control how we run our government. Outrageous.
It's crazy. And that's why, Mark, makes you have to lead the clarion call for people to understand how crazy this is. But the thing is, when you have union bosses trying to conduct policy, like the federal government employees, they can't strike. So what really leverage do they have?
Well, they have the ability to, in fact, they got to listen to what the president says and what the agency says about how we're going to run things. The leverage is the fact that they're government employees. And that used to be kind of one of those employment situations where, you knew you weren't going to get paid as much as you did in the private sector, but you were going to have great job protections. You were going to have great benefits because you work for the government. That's all changed. The government unions have now demanded that the people that are paid with our taxpayer money are making more money than we do in similar situations. So it's out of control. The leverage is basically elected officials. What we do, the president is responsible for the federal government. He's the one person that's held accountable for Article 2 agencies. We get to hold our congressmen accountable every 2 years. We get to hold our senators accountable every 6 years, 1/3 every 2 years. When it comes to Article 2 in the federal branch, who do we hold accountable? The President of the United States. So he ought to have the ability to run that branch the way he sees fit. And if it messes it up, then we hold him accountable or her accountable for their actions with the federal government. We get to do that every 4 years. So this notion that, and the AFG and the NTEU, the National Treasury Employee Union and the American Federation of Government Employees, literally say that we've got to protect our agencies and our turf, if you will, from any president, and we get to run the agencies. That's wrong. And hopefully the courts will strike this down, or I assume President Trump would veto it if it got to his desk, but it's the right thing to do.
So if you were talking to Josh Hawley right now from Missouri, who is likely to vote with the Democrats for this because he's pro-union, I get it. So if you were talking to him and he's like, look, Mark, thanks for the call, but at the end of the day, they should have the right to unionize. They should have their own power. They're there. Private sector has it. And I'm going to stand with with unionization here. I'm going to stand with our great civil servants so they have more authority over what is going on. What would you say to Josh Hawley?
Yeah. Well, John, first of all, I'd say that you're pro-union, but you're not pro-forced unionism. And there is a huge chasm-like difference between those two positions.
Yes.
You can be pro-union, and most people are probably pro-union, but they're against forced unionization, and they're against this monopoly power that union officials have over workers to say, I still get to control your behavior, despite the fact you didn't ask for me, didn't want me, and didn't vote for me. So what I would say to Josh Hawley, why are you pro-forced unionism? Why are you pro-monopoly bargaining and exclusive representation powers by union officials? Because that's out of the mainstream of the American public and their views on the American workplace. So I would say that. The other thing I would say is that, look, union officials have dramatic powers in the private sector. I'd separate the difference. And I'd say we shouldn't stop government employees from unionizing and associating together to raise their voices, but we should never force the government to have to sit down and negotiate over the terms and conditions of running our government. That's what this is all about, is that monopoly position in between taxpayers, voters, and their elected officials. There's a special group right in the middle that says, wait a minute, it doesn't matter what they say, or it doesn't matter what you say, we're going to tell you how to run the government. That's wrong, and everyone should understand that. In fact, I think in Missouri, we fought in 1990, going all the way back to my beginning of my career here in Washington at Right to Work, on a statewide bargaining bill. And believe it or not, we beat it in the legislature, but the Supreme Court there said, no, unions have a right to bargain with the government. I mean, these policies and those types of judicial decisions are just wrong. And I think Josh Hawley should recognize that, the difference between being pro-union and pro-forced unionism. He is now in favor of pro-forced unionism.
I tell you what, the way you articulated that really needs to go national, because you have absolutely nailed it. I mean, I'm pro-union, but I'm not pro-forced union, and I'm certainly not for government bureaucrats dictating what the policy is of the federal government. I mean, it's insanity beyond belief. It is the true definition of insanity, what they're trying to do. I think we have a shot to defeat this in the Senate. Of course, even if it got to the president's desk, he would veto it, and they can't override that. So it's kind of there's a kind of a charade going on here to a certain extent. But, what really concerns me is the 20 House Republicans that, they don't stand up. I mean, they couldn't even articulate what you just did and said. And so they're all afraid. And so they just cower and they vote with, given the power of union bosses over our federal employees. It's nuts.
Yeah. Well, John, just let me one last thing here, just to kind of make a point. I mean, what we know about unions, everyone said, well, there's a place for unions back then when employers were, abusing workers and abusing them and their time and all kinds of these conditions of employment that were just abusive of workers. And so the union movement rises up to protect workers from that. Well, if you take that philosophy about unionization and you apply it today, what you're saying is the worst employer in America is government. They're the most abusive. 32% of government employees are in unions, only 5.9% in the private sector. So the most abusive workplace in America today, allegedly, according to union officials and these 20 Republicans that would say, oh, yeah, we got to have unions to protect their rights. They're saying that the government is an abusive place to work. That's wrong. It's ridiculous. It's about politics and it's about money. Unfortunately, that's the truth on this.
Mark Mix, always great to have you on. Love your spirit and truth to power, baby. That's Mark Mix. You want to follow National Right to Work. Mark is the president of National Right to Work. Mark, where do you go?
Yeah, you can find us on that amazing internet at nrtwc.org. That's the committee, nrtwc.org. Or if you have questions about your legal rights, you can go to our foundation, nrtw.org, and get questions answered about your rights in the American workplace.
Mark, thanks for being with us. Thanks for being such a spirited spokesperson for the right of people to have the freedom to choose whether or not they join a unionized organization and money's not just confiscated out of their paycheck, which is just outrageous to me. Thank you.
Always a fight, John. Always something to do. That's for sure.
All right. I'll see you next week. Mark, to you, your family, have a very Merry Christmas. We're going to be right back. You're on the John Fredericks Media Network.